Hi, this is Graphically Alex coming at you with all things fat related. If that's something that interests you, please subscribe. I'd love to have you. So today I was alerted by Elizabeth, thank you so much, that Abbey Sharp has changed her tune. So we're going to go ahead and watch this. For those of you guys who don't know who Abbey Sharp is, she is going to introduce herself, so I'll let her do her thing. But I kind of want to just jump into it. I have it sped up just a little bit. I just want to start though, because I want to see what she says. But apparently she changes her stance on health at every size and these types of things, and intuitive eating, a lot of this stuff. So I want to hear what she has to say. She is kind of famous, infamous in the E followed by the letter D recovery space. So let's go ahead and listen.
Yep, I've changed. So allow me to reintroduce myself. Hey everyone, I'm Abbey Sharp. Welcome back to Abby's Kitchen. Outside my kitchen, because we're going to do a little real talk today. But I have been a content creator for over a decade and a dietitian for even longer. And currently, as of 2025, I've posted a whopping 725 videos. And that is just on YouTube. I've also posted thousands of pieces of content across TikTok, Instagram, my blog, and now my podcast Bite Back. And I have been interviewed or written for hundreds of media outlets. My loyal subbies who have been here since day one have really seen me grow from like a hopeful 27-year-old filming cooking hacks in her kitchen with bright red lipstick and cute aprons to a mom of two and full-time entrepreneur. And for that, I am really, truly so grateful. Thank you so much for your continued support. But I also know I got a ton of new faces here as well, which means it's time for a reintroduction. And not just a reintroduction, but really a reminder of what I stand for. Okay, before we dive in here, folks.
Okay, she's going to do a little bit of a ad. I'm going to go ahead and skip this 1 second. Okay.
And this offer is only available through my link. That's DRINKLMNT.com/AbbeySharp. So if you look back at my early content catalog, but hopefully not too early because it's kind of embarrassing, but you might have seen that I kind of tended to lean more heavily into the anti-diet message. You know, that all weight loss diets are bad and that dieting is basically disordered. And honestly, that's likely because I was coming into my career having been freshly burned by orthorexia, very much aware of its sneaky traps and signs and red.
Okay, so we talk about this a lot on this channel, that there is a projection aspect, an externalization aspect to the toxic ritualistic world. And a lot of people that go into these fields that are obsessed with this topic, etc., they either have had the issue or they currently have it. And I would say there are quite a few that still do have it, and you have to be very careful. I tell you guys all the time, if somebody will not accept caloric realism, that is a very clear litmus test. If somebody tells you that calories don't matter, you know that they're toxic ritualistic. Almost, I wouldn't even say almost 100% of the time, 100% of the time. It is a really strong litmus test because the toxic ritualistic world, regardless of where you're at, it depends on that foundational belief. There are other foundational beliefs, but that one is so major and it's really, really easy to test for. All you have to do is ask somebody if calories matter and they'll answer. And they typically will think that they know some secret knowledge, or they'll act like they know something that you don't. They'll be more than willing to externalize their DIS order onto you. And, you know, they're more than willing to typically. So anyways, they'll say, oh no, it's such and such macronutrient that matters. Oh no, it's such and such your hormones. Oh no, it's such and such your genetics. If somebody brings up hormones, it's always about satiety. If it's about it magically somehow turns you fat, that is toxic ritualistic. Satiety, yes. Reality, no. Calories forming out of the clear blue, fat materializing through osmosis in the sun and breath, no. That is not happening. So again, there's a little bit of leeway there. I don't like how much people totally throw out hormones. I don't think that that's fair at all. But that being said, so many do abuse hormones as the reason they cannot downsize, which is not true. pretty much every single hormonal issue has a solution, if not multiple solutions. Multiple. So if somebody's not willing to do that, it still falls into you're not taking care of yourself. So it's never an excuse, ever.
Flags and very passionate about protecting others from falling victim. And just because of the way that social media works, once you make like just a few videos with a specific MO or perspective, suddenly that is your brand. Like you are forced to niche down into a box, and therefore
So I don't like how she's talking about this as if she didn't have any choice in the matter, or that she's acting like she wasn't just trying to mass appeal, which, to be fair, this is me being very cynical, which I will be honest with you guys. I can be cynical about people like this. I think that she's seeing a trend shift, and so she's trying to change her brand, which is still honestly an activistic victory for anti-FA. So it's still something to celebrate. For those of us that are fighting this rhetoric, it is major when a major voice falls. And that's basically what she's doing. She's falling in line due to social pressure and due to a shifting landscape that I do believe those in anti-FA, myself included, have pushed the direction of the conversation. So all of us should be happy. Honestly, this is a big victory for us, but one of many more to come, hopefully.
Nuance gets very quickly snuffed out. Thankfully, I am no longer new to the rodeo. At 37, I have had almost 20 years of separation from my ED days, and I have opened myself up to a wide range of perspectives from every corner of the scientific community. I have worked really hard at listening and understanding the root of a particular approach or recommendation before just shutting it down as BS, simply because it doesn't align with my experience or my previous bias. But that shift can be
that's fair. That's more fair, I think.
Hard for viewers and fans when we have all learned to see content creators not as people, but as brands.
That's true.
With just one predictable beat. And that means that a lot of my old content doesn't always align completely with what I say now. Ultimately,
well, it's hard when you're very financially motivated, or when you view your brand as a business or this type of stuff. It's different. I don't struggle with that as much. I've been very open with you guys about the fact that I'm an activist. So I will say things against whatever if it needs to be said. I don't care. But that's why my journey is different. It's why my growth is slower. Probably for other reasons too, let's be real. But it's one of the many reasons that it is slower. And that's just the path that I chose. I'm not really judging anybody. I'm just saying that I don't have that issue. I've been very upfront with you guys. I do have to assert that sometimes. Sometimes people don't get it. Like I've had people tell me, well, why don't you say it in this, like this, or why don't you say this? And I said, because I'm an activist. So I'm trying to change the conversation. I'm not trying to cater to a conversation. That is a very different goal. But again, no hate on her for catering to her audience or catering to whatever she's trying to do or trying to make money or whatever. That's fine. It's still a big deal that she's changing brands. And like I said, I think when it comes to her, I believe that it has to do with social pressure, and it has to do with a shift in rhetoric, a shift in culture. Basically, the cultural demand is shifting her. That's my honest opinion.
So I'm way more committed to being a good science communicator than a predictable content creator. And to do that, I've really had to soften my messaging to allow for much needed nuance and consideration. So today I really want to set the record straight and spill the tea on what I really think on topics like weight loss, Ozempic, health at every size, supplements, and so much more. Consider this my professional reintroduction. So grab a snack or a coffee.
So the brand is changing. So that's the big thing to notice. I don't know if I'll believe all of her reasoning behind things, but we'll see how it goes. But I do think that regardless, the message is clear. The brand is new. The brand has changed. And that is a big deal. And that is a huge victory. And we should be happy. We should. I am. I am happy. I am.
coffee, get comfy, and allow me to reintroduce myself.
Allow me to reintroduce myself.
Let's start off hot with weight loss drugs.
Same old phone?
Oh, 1 second. Okay.
If Ozempic came onto the scene like 10 years ago, I probably would have fully written it off. Like I can already see like 2012 Abbey zeroing in on all those health risks without really weighing those against its efficacy. But what I understand today is just how important it is to approach these topics from a macro view with greater curiosity and empathy. Now with weight loss drugs specifically, I have learned that despite the risks and side effects, these drugs have been revolutionary in reshaping people's lives. You know, weight gain and weight loss are incredibly complex processes shaped by so much.
Okay. So I'm a little skeptical about what she's going to say here. I'm just going to let you guys know. There is definitely a toxic ritualistic pipeline to Ozempic. So depending on her messaging, it could be just that. Remember that Ozempic in and of itself is not toxically ritualistic, but Ozempic and weight loss drugs can definitely be a part of a toxic ritualistic cycle. It is definitely something that can be absorbed, sucked into the black hole of the toxic ritualistic, and twisted and manipulated for the problems, E followed by the letter D, for the purpose of that. Which again, we see this with politics, we see this with even at times religion, we see it with a lot of different things where it comes in. Ozempic is definitely one of those things. It is not safe from the toxic ritualistic world whatsoever. It is actually a huge red flag. I'd be very careful to prescribe it to people that have that issue because they will not use it well. I'll put it to you that way. And I do think there is a lot of that going on, and that's across the spectrum. So I don't, when it comes to drugs in general, I'm just skeptical or questioning. It's like I'm not somebody who blindly believes it's always the solution. I don't believe that. That doesn't mean that I believe it is never the solution. I've told you guys many times on this channel, I view it very gray, which is very difficult to do online. People hate neutral takes. They hate it. So while I would never demonize Ozempic, I will not glorify it either. I will keep saying that. It's definitely a nuanced conversation. It's definitely something to consider on a case-by-case basis. So I hope that that's clear.
More than just food or willpower. So for example, genes or genetics can actually impact.
So as far as food and willpower, she's already going right into genes. I told you that's very toxic ritualistic, so I'm not liking what I'm hearing here at all. But let's discuss food plus willpower. So what is the real issue behind not being able to downsize when it comes to food and willpower? It has to do with there's physical enemies and there are psychological enemies of downsizing. The physical enemies, I've told you guys many times, they're particularly loud within people that with hormonal disruptions or people who are super morbidly obese. And then there are certain scenarios for women specifically where it's harder hormonally. For example, there can be a part of your cycle, your monthly cycle, that it's more difficult to adhere to a diet. There's also postpartum, there's menopause, right? So there's a lot of stuff that does influence your appetite specifically within certain contexts, and it cannot be ignored at all. So that's really important. But in general, if we're talking about the average person who's super morbidly obese, there's typically some amount of hypothyroidism, even if it's just due to too much estrogen in the body from too much body fat, or liver issues, which is really common. So having a fatty liver, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, it will definitely make you develop hypothyroid symptoms, which can lead to hunger and tiredness. So what are the two physical enemies? Hunger and exhaustion. Those two. The more hungry you are, the more tired you are, the harder it will be on a physical level. So it's very important to always consider those things, especially if you are super morbidly obese. You need to constantly fight your exhaustion and fight your hunger. So you have to eat in a way that is very much geared towards your personal genetic code to even where you're at in the moment, in the season, in the time of year, in your cycle, etc., etc., etc. You have to make it extremely tailored to you, and you have to recognize, I am more hungry when I don't eat this versus I am more hungry when I eat this, and you have to make those adjustments. It's like driving a car. You have to be able to shift gears within a downsizing journey, especially from a huge size. Now, those things do apply within morbid obesity and class 1 obesity, but they're not as stark. So you have to look at it. Remember too, diabetes is another common one that will make you more hungry and more tired. So pay attention to that type of thing, which it's important. On the mental side, the toxic ritualistic world, BINGE, will lead to delusional thinking around food. It will lead to cycles, often that you engage in for the sake of predictable chaos or predictable tragedy or predictable HARM, basically. It is rooted typically in self-hatred and trauma, which it has to be pretty significant, especially if it's a severe case of the toxic ritualistic. But regardless, it is a mental pathology. It is in the DSM. It is a DIS order. So it involves too much reduction, too much, and focus on image, we'll just say, particularly when it comes to your size. So obsession over how one looks in the mirror, for example. Obsession. And lastly, BINGE, which within BINGE, people spend most of their time in that one, or it's a lot more common. So that can be just obsessing over food or actually engaging in the behavior. So that is a huge mental barrier to downsizing that is often not talked about. It's almost taboo. And again, one of the toxic ritualistic beliefs is that it's all genetic. It's not. So within genetic conversations, there can obviously be some genetic predispositions to certain physical issues, and also when it comes to the toxic ritualistic, there can be a genetic component, but you're inheriting the neuroticism from your parents. You're not inheriting the actual behaviors. You're taught the behaviors, and it has to be activated by some sort of trauma. That's how it's genetic. It's extremely indirect. So when people talk about genetics and obesity, they don't talk about it honestly. They act like it's a magic thing that creates a set point, which is a huge myth. Set point myth is what it should be called. It's not real. But it is one of the foundational beliefs of the toxic ritualistic. So, one of the pillars, I guess you could say, it's a major thing. If somebody goes on and on and on about set point theory, you need to see that as a red flag. It is a huge red flag, because what is going away? Caloric realism. They're not acknowledging that calories matter when they say that. It's very, very important. So she's on thin ice with me.
Dopamine reward pathways and how intensely we react to food, which when combined
It's toxic ritualistic. So you teach your brain to do that through obsession.
with a hyper-palatable food environment plus socioeconomic factors, it can make
So socioeconomic factors don't really make sense as far as massive gain, because it costs too much, especially today. So I don't agree with that at all. What I do agree with is it can make it harder to downsize past a certain point, because you may not be able to purchase certain diet culture things like a diet soda, for example. And so it might be harder for you to adhere to a deficit if you can't have those helpers along the way. That is a way that I could see money interfering. But with downsizing, I mean. But otherwise, logically, the less food, the less money. So, and if you're really hard done by, you might end up downsizing anyways because you can't afford it. You just can't. So I don't agree with that unless if she's talking about middle class specifically, then maybe middle class is at a specific risk factor for the toxic ritualistic. I could see that. Somebody that has enough disposable income to use DoorDash constantly, for example, that could be a risk factor, but not the very poor. It doesn't make sense. So I don't like what she's saying.
Sustainable weight loss feel virtually impossible. So GLP-1s work not just by stabilizing blood sugars, which does have an effect on weight management, but also by...
She's also not acknowledging the material cost of Ozempic either for certain people. So it's just odd. But maybe that's what she's talking about in terms of socioeconomic. She's thinking, oh, the only way to downsize is with Ozempic, which is toxic ritualistic, by the way. If somebody tells you that, they're lying. That's a lie. So it might be something that helps them specifically, but to put a blanket statement out there, it's very toxic ritualistic. And even in the case of the person, they should admit that it is possible for them. It just may be harder in a way that they don't want to deal with, basically. If they can't, then I would be wary because it starts to turn supernatural. So if things turn supernatural on you in the conversation around weight loss drugs, you need to be really careful with who you're talking to because they do. If it's talked about like a miracle, it's a problem, major problem.
Quieting the food noise that makes weight loss or even weight maintenance.
Food noise, as far as I know, it has a lot to do with the toxic ritualistic and the obsession with food. So what a lot of people don't understand is your brain, you can train your brain to be obsessed with something. So what does that mean? It means you stop obsessing over it. You don't allow yourself to think about it anymore. And people don't want to hear that because they don't want to do the mental work. But that's really what it is. If you're getting enough nutrition, you're not going to have that physical drive to think about it, the mental drive to think about it. You're probably just getting dopamine. You're dopamine mining just thinking about it because you trained your brain to be obsessed with it. And your brain gets dopamine from obsession and anticipation. So you are dopamine mining in a very unhealthy way. But what is required to fix that is to stop. And it's not necessarily always suggestible to blanket recommend drugs for people to shift their dopamine pathways indiscriminately. I don't think that that's necessarily ideal for most people. For some, it can be. For some severe cases, but I don't think severity is that common. And that's another thing we have to talk about too. You know, it's not something that the average person really needs, especially not to lose like 30 pounds. It's just not necessarily smart. And if we're talking from a very severe level, just know I will never give you the out if you do not have access to that drug. It is not an excuse whatsoever. So stop obsessing. I just saved you some money.
Maintenance so damn hard. So from my perspective, I do see how drugs like these can actually give folks the mental space to fill with other acts of self-care and health promoting activities because they are no longer hardwired to just think about food.
Drugs are not required for that. Just need that to be clear.
That has got to be...
Where I do appreciate GLP-1s is specifically for people who struggle with physical hunger, who have physical issues like diabetes, for example. It's a great one. But even just general insulin resistance, it can be tough at times. So I understand that completely. But if it's physically based, that's where I'm much more favorable towards it. I don't necessarily agree with using it for the mental work, as I've seen too many people, at least online, who have used the drug not do any mental work within the toxic ritualistic world, and they're at massive risk of regain, and they're kind of just generally unwell because to realistically, for somebody who has BINGE to become thin with zero internal work, they can't process what thin actually is. They've put it on a pedestal in their brain for so long, so it makes them really weird. And I wouldn't personally care, except that when you're that weird about it, when it's like I'm on top of the pedestal now and I'm the one now because I'm thin. This is how these people think. You fall, there's a risk of falling off that pedestal, and it's weird. It's just very weird, and you act strange, and it needs to be pointed out. And I think regardless, you have to do the mental work. You have to stop obsessing. You have to do it anyways. And people don't want to because they don't want to let go of it. Something that people don't understand about the toxic ritualistic is it is a self-soothing mechanism, and people are very attached to it, almost like a friend, although of course it's an enemy. I call it Pennywise. It will kill you. But it shapeshifts. It takes the form of what a person needs it to be. It's horrible. It's truly horrible. But you have to kill it. You have to get rid of it. You have to throw it out of your mind. I don't care what method you use. You have to get rid of it, or it will always be at risk forever. And people don't want to let go of it. They don't. So oftentimes, what does that look like? It looks like an obsession with how they look, post-downsizing. That's a very common example. So let's continue.
So freeing. Now, obviously, with all that said, just because I see value in GLP-1s for a certain demographic doesn't mean I think that they are for everyone to be using.
That's fair.
There are very brutal side effects and risks. They absolutely can be misused. And when weight loss can be commodified, it does further stigmatize those who don't hop on board.
Okay, I agree with that. I'm happy with her for stating that. So I like a little bit of a balance there. I've always told you guys it is a tool. It is a tool with risks. You need to assess if those risks are worth it to you, and you need to be aware of them. And you also have to look at the risks of staying your current size, and you have to look at your actual ability too. If we're going to be real, I only quit the toxic ritualistic because I got to death's door and I wanted to live, which I know sounds really dramatic, but it's the truth. I would not have stopped. I was so stubborn in it. I rode it all the way. And it's like, and I had to say goodbye to it in a very dramatic way, instantly and quickly. And it was very difficult, but I'm a very gritty person. And so I could do it. And I don't know if everybody can, because I don't know if it's a psychological level, but it takes grit. You have to be gritty to get out of supermorbid obesity. Naturally, you do. And if you can find it within yourself, that's amazing. But it is difficult. And doing it naturally also has it has some risks too. And it has downsides too. So it's really, really important to consider all sides of this equation. That's what we need to think about when we're talking about these medications. You have to look at your options in front of you. If you, for example, don't have access to the medication, are you just going to die because you don't? I wouldn't suggest that. You see? And that's how people act. And for people who over glorify the medication, I would ask that question to them. So if somebody can't get it, should they just die? You know what I'm saying? But you also have to be aware of, it's a job to get out. It's difficult. You have to work hard and you have to organize, and it's often a battle. It can take years, and it's difficult because if you're in an emergency situation where you have to downsize immediately or you're going to pass away sooner, then obviously you should take the medication or do surgery or whatever needs to be done. These things cannot be talked about universally. But regardless, That's the truth. When you're super morbidly obese, it is difficult. You are not in a good position. The longer you're there, the worse it will be. So if you're there, I would highly suggest finding a way out and getting out and staying out. And if the toxic ritualistic is one of your reasons, you need to fight that shit immediately, incessantly, until it is gone.
I saw many of these things firsthand in my Ozempic Diary series, where I followed a real life experience with Ozempic. And I 100% think it's important to talk about these issues that may or may not be mentioned amongst all of the drug's benefits. But being vehemently against Ozempic or seeing it as like an easy way out, as wellness culture seems
It's
to
not.
suggest, does far more harm.
It is never an easy way out, ever. So anybody who needs to hear that, when you're super morbidly obese, there is no such thing as an easy way out. It doesn't exist. It doesn't.
Than good. It's stigmatizing, ableist, and exclusionary, especially for folks who are already struggling to access care. So if you are able to improve your health, quality of life, and happiness with Ozempic, then amazing. We should all be happy for you. Next up, let's talk about supplements.
Okay. 1 second. Okay, so we're on supplements.
A year ago, I launched a supplement line, New Theory. And we really came into this with the mission to revolutionize a supplement industry that is largely unregulated, chaotic, and like one giant hot mess. And I got a lot of comments calling me a sellout, a grifter, and a liar. But there was a lot that went into this decision that many people did not give me credit for. And that's totally fine. I don't expect credit for this, but I did just kind of want to clear the air. Throughout my career, I have always been supportive of a well thought out supplement regimen. I actually can't even remember a time in my adult life where I haven't taken some kind of supplements. Now, of course, as a dietitian, I am all for a foods first approach wherever possible. But I've also been very consistent in my messaging of trying to make nutrition less stressful, not more. And I don't want people to have to obsess over
Supplementation it's challenging. I have a very mixed relationship with it. I've never talked about it with you guys really, but just as a baseline, this is just my very blanket statement, okay? Which I'm not here for an argument about it. This is just, let me just tell you what I think. Vitamin A is not good to be supplemented. You need to get it naturally. And typically most people need it in the form of an animal product. Most, not all, but most. Vitamin C is not a good supplement because it's just pure ascorbic acid. You need it in the form of fruit. You need a full C complex. Vitamin B can help. Vitamin B is a decent one, but you'd want to get a B complex. Calcium is typically bad. Don't take calcium carbonate. It's horrible. I think citrate is probably better, but they're not that great. You don't absorb it that great, in my opinion. Vitamin E is not great to supplement. It's just not. Anything else? Vitamin D, I do supplement. That one I do support. I think that's all I can think of off the top of my head. So that's like my baseline. So some things you can, some things you can't. They're just not the same thing as the food. And vitamin C is a really tricky one. And people think that they're getting enough because they're having ascorbic acid, and it's not. It doesn't work. You'll still probably get sick and stuff like that. So anyways, that's just my quick thoughts on supplementation. As far as other things like herbals and things like that, I've told you guys a lot. I take stinging nettle root primarily to reduce estrogen through reducing aromatase, which has been very helpful to me. But you really have to look at your specific situation. You have to look at what works for you, et cetera, et cetera. There's oftentimes some experimentation. You have to find brands. It is tough. I agree with her. So you have to look at what you should do personally. It's very specific. Very specific. But yeah, let's continue.
for every meal being nutritionally perfect when there are so many other things that we should be thinking about in life. So to me, supplements can be a really great way to help you meet your nutrition needs effortlessly and conveniently so you don't have to stress about every bite of food. And in specific circumstances like nutrient deficiencies, they are definitely indicated. I've personally found supplements to be extremely useful.
You just have to be really careful too, because like certain forms of zinc don't absorb. You really have to research. Certain magnesium doesn't absorb. You really have to just research what you're doing. But I'm not against it at all, but just really look at absorption. It's really important.
For meeting my nutrient needs and providing symptom relief at different points in my life. And I've shared a lot of those different things that I found helpful way before I decided to venture into the industry with the goal of trying to change it. But with all that said, not all supplements are created equal. It is true that I have reviewed a lot of influencer and celebrity created supplements over the years. And in many cases, I've called them out. But my main pushback has never been all supplements are bad. It's because the lack of industry regulation paves the way for crazy misleading claims and ingredients that A, aren't backed by research, B, are provided in window dressing doses that are really too small for them to do anything, and C, are not third-party tested for safety and purity. And that's why all new dairy products will always be third-party tested with results posted publicly, because we really do believe that that should be the industry standard. Ultimately, I will never ever tell you that you need a protein powder over like a whole food protein source, but if you find that supplements are a helpful way to meet your goals, then I want to provide you with the best options on the market. So yes, I'm a dietitian.
It's very specific. So in my opinion, it's not something that people can just flat out prescribe. I think people need to look at their specific case, which is similar to really anything, like as far as like medication, supplementation, these types of things. Like you really have to look at your specific situation. And I think a lot of people don't want to do the work. They don't want to research things. They don't want to experiment or try what works for them. People just accept things, quote unquote, as they are and then say it's my genetics, which is BS.
With a supplement brand. And you know what? I am so proud to put my name behind this brand because it is by far the best on the market. I am not here to scam you with low quality products for a quick buck. Honestly, we will be in a money-losing scenario for a few years as these products are just so expensive to produce. But I'm just so passionate about this because I really do think that by creating enough noise, I can really help to revolutionize the industry and make it better and a safer experience for everyone. Okay, the next topic might ruffle a few feathers, but we're going to be talking about health at every size, aka HAES.
That's a big one. Hold on a second.
First, the good. I made this video 5 years ago or so speaking to the benefits of HAES, which I still absolutely do agree with. There are a lot of things that I really respect about the HAES movement. So for example, its weight neutral approach, social justice framework, and the work to
weight neutral? I don't know about that. I don't know what they mean by social justice framework. Let me just put it to you this way. I've been heavily burned by FA for me to be like, oh yeah, totally.
Reduce anti-fat stigma and provide accessible care for all. But HAES also does challenge a lot of traditional scientific knowledge in the weight loss space, namely that weight is not a significant driver of health outcomes. Now, near the start of my career after recovering from an ED and really feeling like I had been kind of saved by anti-diet and intuitive eating movements, there seemed to be this really big push towards the kind of HAES approach within the intuitive eating or anti-diet community. And it got to the point where it almost felt like if you even acknowledged any legitimate health risks of obesity, like type 2 diabetes or some cancers, liver damage, whatever, that you were like a traitor because all of those...
Because it's toxic ritualistic, because it has to do with DIS order. That's why. I've tried to explain to you guys a lot. It's like a belief system. It's like a cult, basically. That's the closest thing I can say that to somebody who hasn't had it. It's similar to that. It's not just internal, it's also interpersonal. And it is delusional, but it's a delusion that you constantly have to reinforce to yourself, and you want other people to reinforce it too. And you also, there's people that get carried away feeling like they're a rebel and they're doing this and doing that. And that happens all across the board. So there's like a rebellious feeling behind it. And it's a bunch of hogwash. It's a bunch of bullshit, honestly. But again, people with those issues tend to be obsessed or go into these industries. And then they push DIS ordered messages to the public and to people who don't have those issues. So it's not that it is a social contagion. It's not really like that, because you have to be traumatized in order to develop it. And even being traumatized, you won't necessarily develop it. But there is such a thing as people who are not toxically ritualistic believing toxic ritualistic mindsets, like weight is genetic. There's a lot of people that believe that have never had E fall by the letter D, because people that do push it so vehemently, so constantly, all the time.
Those things could actually be explained by the impact of weight stigma. You couldn't even say the word obesity without getting called out, which really gave way to like these very lengthy 20-minute long disclaimers in every video. It was actually a really stressful experience as a creator, because I was just always worried about offending someone. But today, my perspective is a lot more nuanced. As I often say now,
you have to not affirm, and it's really hard for people in today's climate, especially within psychology. There's this huge focus on affirmation, affirming everything. Affirming the toxic ritualistic will never ever help somebody with the issue. And I don't care if it pisses people off to say that. You cannot affirm this problem. You can never affirm it, ever. If you actually care about somebody, you cannot affirm their delusions in regard to this issue. You just cannot. Affirmation within the toxic ritualistic, you are affirming death. So I need you to understand that. It is very bad to affirm these things, to tell somebody, yes, weight is genetic. Yes, the media does put a lot of pressure on women, so you should feel that way. No. Do not affirm. I say things like, well, why don't you turn the TV off? They hate that. But, I mean, you have to say certain things. Oh, the magazines. Well, why don't you not look at them? Why are you so obsessed with them? I don't look at magazines. I know a lot of people who don't. You see? They don't want to hear that. Because it's society's fault. It's society. When you know damn well nobody wants you to do what you're doing. So shut up. Nobody wants you to do what you're doing. Society doesn't want you to do what you're doing. You're specifically rebelling against society. Notice how they will do that, right? We are rebelling against societal standards, but we're also doing it because of societal standards. That is a contradiction. That is toxic ritualistic, and it cannot be affirmed. You see? That's hard for people to do. And a lot of people online don't want to do it because they want your money. So it's no shade, but I mean, it is shade. I don't think anybody should affirm it, ever. It'd be better to just be quiet than to affirm. But there has to be activists to speak out against it, like myself. And there needs to be more.
I support body autonomy, and I want to meet people where they are. So for one person, a more weight neutral approach is going to feel supportive, whereas for others, intentional weight loss is going to be desired. I also don't
Okay,
censor
she's
science,
taking a midline
while it is
approach.
true that weight stigma does affect health, and around 10 to 25% of obese folks are considered metabolically healthy, which are core messages in the HAES spaces, we still do know that obesity and excess fat is a major driver of chronic disease. Research even shows that even a modest 5 to 10% weight loss can have significant physical health benefits, not to mention the profound effects on emotional well-being and quality of life. And even if you're losing weight for aesthetic reasons, who am I to decide that that is not best for you? Like, as long as it's not promoting harmful messages to the masses or coming at the expense of your health, it's really not for me to condemn.
True.
But when I
That's true.
see a very irresponsible What in a Day video slammed with falsehoods and insanely problematic tips, I am 100%
Modern.
Well, yeah, she can have her opinions. 1 second.
going to take it down. Bottom line, I do think that two things can be true. We can fight for systemic change, kindness, and accommodations towards larger body.
So I think what we need to do is I think going into my next era, I'm going to look at some of the systemic stuff. We're going to look at it a little bit. I'm going to focus primarily on the United States, as that's where I'm born and raised and where I live. And it's an important place. It is the birthplace of fat acceptance. So we're going to talk about it for sure. We're going to start talking about it a little bit. We're going to get a little institutional. It makes me very nervous too, but I'm going to talk about the things that I think are actually systemic. And it's not going to be what you think. For example, it's not the media. It isn't. That's not going to make somebody do something crazy. That just makes people think, oh, that's crazy. And then they move on. It's other stuff. So for example, a big one I talked about in this is affirmation within therapy. That is a systemic issue in regards to binge. It is huge. Huge systemic issue. So we're going to talk about things, but as far as the kindness towards larger bodies, it's a lot of fluff words. I don't know what it really means. I think it's, I don't agree with shaming. I've told you guys that. Shaming fuels a toxic ritualistic cycle. So I've never been for that. But when we're looking at shaming behaviors, we have to think about what are we shaming? Are we shaming how somebody looks, or are we shaming what they're doing? Or are we shaming their beliefs around food? So there is a place for it. If somebody is totally delusional, they need to be snapped back to reality in regard to this issue. If somebody is very clearly doing behaviors, those behaviors do need to be shamed to the extent that they're not accepted. For example, another systemic issue in the United States is the glorification of fast food. It's crazy out there. I play with the idea, is eating fast food something that should be shamed? On a cultural level, maybe. It's questions I have. You see, but do you see how that's a little different than pointing at somebody who's fat and laughing at them? It's different. So we do need to talk about these issues, and I need to develop my theorems more in the future. And we're looking towards a new era on this channel. So I'm going to be talking about these things because I think it's time. But that is another example, the overglorification of fast food. It's huge.
Folks, and we can fight for better solutions and treatments if people do seek weight loss as a way to improve their quality of life. So that's really where I'm at when it comes to weight loss today. Okay, moving on to a related topic, intuitive eating. Okay. I have made a lot of intuitive eating content because it's really an...
So I'm going to give my stance really quick before she does. Essentially, I believe in intuitive eating in regard to macros, but not calorically. Simple.
Space framework that has been truly life-changing for me and also so many others. But in my early days, again, when I was probably a lot more caught up in kind of the more strict anti-diet HAES community, I think I likely presented intuitive eating as something that everyone should be able to do because it's an innate skill. And that was probably unfair. So like when people would say to me, well, that doesn't work for me, I would default to the commonly cited explanation that it's because you're still stuck in diet mentality. So if you want to learn to eat intuitively, you have to stop wanting to lose weight. So this of course means that while intuitive eating is often idealized, it's by nature very exclusionary. Like it may be innate in a vacuum, but out in the real world, it actually requires specific physical, psychological, and environmental conditions that just aren't accessible to everyone. Not only does it alienate folks who do desire weight loss, but it may also just not be appropriate or possible.
I think it doesn't take into effect the toxic ritualistic. It doesn't do enough. It's often still affirming it in a lot of ways, particularly for the binge side of things, which I know it's focused more on the overly reductive side, which maybe it does have a place there. I can't say. I don't know that every solution is true across the board, but it is a huge blind spot within binge. Huge blind spot. I think a lot of people have the misconception within recovery that people only binge due to reduction, but that's not why. They do it due to anxiety, which is very broad and can be for any and all reasons. So when people talk about, I got grief, or I went through a lot of grief, because I went through grief, I gained 100 pounds. That's a toxic ritualistic statement. Going through grief doesn't cause somebody to gain 100 pounds. Massively overeating is what causes people to gain 100 pounds. You see? So it's really important to keep that reality there and make sure that people understand there is a middle step. I've gone through some grief in my downsizing journey. I've gone through a hell of a lot of stress and a hell of a lot of anxiety, but it never stopped me because I could see that was a toxic ritualistic connection. A certain emotion or feeling or event or anything doesn't necessitate an action regarding binge. It doesn't necessitate binge. That is not a real thing. Being stressed does not necessitate a binge. Being bored does not necessitate a binge. That is not real. The connection doesn't exist. You're forcing that connection to exist. It's something that you're reinforcing, and that would be something to not affirm. I went through grief, so I gained 100 pounds. What do you mean? You mean you overate a lot? You mean you ate too much for too long? Get somebody to admit it. People lie. And that can be really hard for somebody to admit. They won't. Well, I felt that way. Well, that doesn't mean you had to eat that way. But it does. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. That's not a real connection. That's false. See, it takes a lot of no. You can't affirm. People want to affirm.
For folks who are neurodivergent, managing an active eating disorder, have trauma history, are food insecure, or are taking medications or have health conditions that mess with normal appetite signaling. And I'm really just scratching the surface. I now have a much more moderate approach to intuitive eating. Like, I really do think that all of the tenets can be incredibly helpful, but you don't need to subscribe to all of them to get value. Now, that's not to say that we should pick and choose the principles to the point where we are fully representing its values and calling it intuitive eating. Like, I do truly cringe when I see wellness influencers share their 1,200 calorie weight loss diet and hashtag it intuitive eating, because that is co-opting an actual evidence-based framework. So that's why when I'm not talking about the intuitive eating framework as it was originally conceptualized in its entirety, I prefer to use terms like food freedom and body kindness, because I think we can make choices that support our goals in a way that still feels freeing, which is exactly the objective of my signature method, the Hunger Crushing Combo. Now let's move on to my views on alternative medicine or fringe diets, or really any approach that isn't really backed up by science.
1 second. Okay, this will be interesting.
In the past, I would be really quick to dismiss anything without hard evidence as quackery. Unfortunately, it is kind of the way that a lot of us healthcare professionals have been trained, because we follow a biomedical approach. But the problem with strictly following a 100% biomedical approach is you lose a lot of people and a lot of valuable practices in the process. The absence of evidence doesn't necessarily mean that something is BS. It just means it hasn't been studied yet. And there are a lot of factors that influence research. Research is often funded and prioritized by what the dominant scientific community deems relevant or interesting, or what they can make money off of, which means sometimes it can take years before a traditional practice or a natural practice that's been used for centuries is even looked at for efficacy. But that should not automatically discount its validity. Just take lemon water, for example. I used to be so fed up seeing all these influencers making these outlandish claims about lemon water detoxing you or causing weight loss, or I would just roll my eyes and say that's BS. But I've since learned, and trying to hone some skills here, that when you flat out dismiss someone's beliefs or lived experience, they are going to tune out everything you have to say. It's not people-centered, it's not respectful, and you really never know if a person shares your worldviews or values. So now when I'm discussing something that lacks research, I try to discuss all of the possible mechanistic explanations for why something may or may not work, and then basically let the person come to their own informed decision.
That's the right way to do.
With lemon water, I would probably explain how it is seen as a natural detox, because it is basically water, and frame it just within how well it will move the needle compared to more accessible alternatives just like basic water. Now, it's important to note that there's a very big difference between
Well, it can just be that it tastes better to somebody. And maybe it has potassium. I know it has vitamin C, especially if it's fresh lemon, which a lot of people don't get enough vitamin C, and it could be a way. By the way, that is a way, but you have to have quite a bit of lemon to get enough vitamin C. You have to have look it up. I think it's 2 or 3 whole lemons. It's quite a bit, especially for a man, because you need more. But, it is a way to at least supplement your vitamin C. So that's part of it, if it's fresh.
Alternative practices or products that are unlikely to do much other than waste your money, and those that
Which what people need to understand about a lot of these types of hacks is that they can help with hunger simply because you're getting a little bit more nutrition. For example, vitamin C is super slept on by most people. Most people in America do not get enough vitamin C, period. They don't. They eat a lot of they'll have some meat, they'll have a lot of bread. There's a lot of heavy, heavy grains in the US diet, and they will never touch a fruit to save their life because it has sugar in it. But then they'll eat a bunch of bread, which it doesn't make any sense. It's like a cognitive dissonance type of thing. It's very superstitious too when people talk like that. It's very bizarre to me anyway. But regardless, they will avoid that, I think typically because they like bread better than fruit. So they'll say, oh, I want bread and not fruit because bread is better and I want my carbs to come from bread. Okay, but bread doesn't have vitamin C. And a lot of people also avoid veggies because they don't taste as good to them or these types of things, which I also, I have different views on veggies because of thyroid health. But I don't think every vegetable is bad. I would suggest for, thyroid people to have it if it came from a flower. So your cucumbers, your tomatoes, your squashes, these types of things, rather than your leaves and stuff like that. It's not as great for thyroid health, but that doesn't mean they're evil. So it's difficult to talk about these things because people tend to view it so black and white, and I'm very aware of that. So it's not usually black and white. But people, you got to look at it. You got to look at it.
Have the potential to harm, especially when they displace evidence-based treatments. And as a healthcare professional, my duty is to call out the grifters and make you aware.
I think my biggest issue is just making huge blanket statements about every single person with pretty much anything. I don't think that it's the case. I don't think that things work for everyone. For example, Ozempic. For me personally, I have very difficult thyroid issues. And it is in my belief, it has not been disproven to me whatsoever, that Ozempic is anti-thyroid. And it could be anti-thyroid in a way that could have made it crazy. It could have made my mental health insane, as there have been a lot of people with very, very rough mental health side effects with Ozempic or using those types of drugs, particularly from a huge size, especially if they're toxic ritualistic, especially being super morbidly obese, right? Especially these types of things. And I think also, especially if they're very, very hypo. I had enough of a hard time psychologically just downsizing naturally. If I would have used Ozempic, I don't know if I would be here today. I know that's a weird thing to say, but my mental health struggled a lot in 2023. It was very difficult. And Ozempic may have pushed me over the edge. So while within the same family, I do support and encourage my mom using Ozempic for her diabetes, for example, and to help with some kind of appetite reduction or whatever you want to call it. It still has to be somewhat controlled. And she's taking a diabetic dose and all these things. It's very gray, but you have to look at it. And why am I so or why is it a big deal that my mom's just taking a diabetic dose? Because she is also within the toxic ritualistic. So she has to separate it from weight. And it needs to be separated from weight. Why? I hate to put my mom on blast, but there are times where BINGEs occur, and that can be dangerous if you're taking Ozempic at a very high dose. So for somebody who is within the toxic ritualistic, I do not suggest Ozempic. It's risky. It's riskier than is necessary, especially at high doses. But again, there can be shades of gray. So it's really important to consider these things and not make blanket statements for everybody, and certainly not push drugs onto people, which is very common in American society to do, which I think is really bizarre, and it needs to stop. So I think these are some of the things that can happen with like carnivore, veganism, keto, these other types of diets. People can make huge blanket statements on all of society, and I don't think that it's necessary. I think it's important to look at what is working for you, what can get you there. And I do my best to live a pro-thyroid lifestyle. I want you guys to be aware of thyroid health. That's kind of like a tertiary wing to my activism, is to bring thyroid health to the conversation, because it is so often ignored. And a lot of you guys appreciate it, who are hypo or who are struggling with the disease. It's important. And again, you have to look at your medications and things. And here's the tea. It's going to require effort. You're going to have to look at your individual situation. And nobody wants to hear that. And nobody wants to say it. But that's the truth. You have to look at your individual situation. It's tough. But you can do it. You can. I believe in you. I believe you can. You can look at your situation.
Of those very real risks. So while I am not against alternative medical practices, and I actually support many of them and believe in many of them and use many of them myself, you can absolutely still count on me to call out the raw milk, or eating full sticks of butter, or using celery juice to cure cancer. I assure you folks, there still must be a line. Now, last but not least, I want to talk a little about my attitude throughout the years.
Same old phone?
Okay.
Nah.
I don't know. Maybe at some point, members, maybe I'll do like a Q&A and my members can ask me like what I believe about certain things, but it's just my opinion, you know, basically that's what that is. But anyways, let's continue. Okay, this will be interesting.
So one of the first videos that kind of put me on the map was a review of Freely the Banana Girl. It was actually my first introduction to like the What I Eat in a Day format that everyone kind of knows and loves. For that, I was mainly doing recipe videos and like nutrition hacks. But I had so many people messaging me about her videos, and these were really young, like 13-year-old girls telling me that they had been trying to eat her.
By the way, I think Freely is very toxic ritualistic, extremely so, but she's on the reductive side. That's my opinion. But very much so.
Raw vegan diet because she's beautiful and she's thin. She credits her diet to that, but they had become so physically and psychologically sick from all of her suggestions and tips. So when I watched it as a fresh orthorexia recovery,
Yeah, and she definitely fueled my toxic ritualistic too, which is interesting, especially on the reductive side, because she pushed me to let go of caloric realism further, which is horrible. So we can, you know, even people on the opposite ends of things can harm others within the problem. But you see the overall pillar is caloric realism doesn't exist. And Freely is a huge proponent that calories don't matter. That is a huge thing that she has said many, many, many times. Even using the word binge like it's no big deal, and trying to normalize it and stuff, which is bizarre. And clearly what she's saying is not what she's doing. But anyways, I know a little bit about her. I used to watch her. So no, she gets the stamp of toxic ritualistic from me, for sure.
I was truly enraged. And people ate it up. Now, when I watched that video back, frankly, I'm a little bit embarrassed because I was a total and I own that. And unfortunately, as I alluded to earlier, the internet loves when people take a hard stand. So like snarky No BS Abbey got big views. It's the same reason why this reaction to Gwyneth Paltrow's diet was my most viewed video in 2023. I get emotional and angry.
People, I mean, that's also a shift in trends. Like, it just depends. There are times when I get angry, but I'm not always angry all the time, you know?
And like people will click on it because they feel the same way. It wasn't that I've been intentionally snarky or acting out emotions I didn't feel, but obviously this did encourage me to kind of play up this persona for a very long time. But here's the truth. Anyone who knows me in real life can agree that—
Well, you need to be yourself. I agree, you need to be yourself. I am myself, but I change a lot too, because I've changed a lot throughout this journey. My hormones are constantly fluctuating. It's, you know, I've been drastically different sizes throughout this journey on this channel, and it does affect your mood. It affects how you think. It affects things. And it's been, you know, I've loved talking to you guys about the eras and these types of things because it helps to create a map out. And I keep, you know, I'm going to keep at it. And I'm really glad I'm getting to the end of MSP. You know, I had like this epiphany the other day where it's like, you know, I don't have to push so hard anymore. It's like, it's okay. I'm just not as insecure, and I'm not like perfectly secure, but it's just different. The way I feel is different. And I try to honor that, but I know it's weird. It's very weird. Like if you look at a lot of my winter videos, I'm more angry in the winter. If you look at my summer videos, I'm more sad or reflective. If you look at, you know, my autumn videos, I'm usually happier. And the spring ones, I'm usually really snarky and bitchy, kind of, but like fun bitchy, you know? So it's like, I've gone through many phases throughout this journey. I don't regret it. It's a lot, I know, but it's partly why a lot of people don't publicly downsize, because they don't want to go through those shifts publicly. But I don't care, and I could do it, so I did it. But if I change, it's probably just because I feel different, you know? It doesn't mean that I didn't feel that way emotionally, you know? Just like now, if I feel more calm, or I don't feel like I have to push so dang hard all the time because I'm getting out of MSP energy, I'm going to honor that, you know? And if it comes back, then it comes back. But, you know, it's different, I guess, in my case. My tone tends to reflect how I'm feeling at the time. So, yeah. That's just me, though. Which I'm trying my best activistically. I try to normalize a downsizing journey for emotional people, because a lot of emotional people believe it's not possible for them. And so I'm trying to show you guys that it is possible, and that you can do it throughout the phase changes. And we need representation of emotional people doing it too, but it's difficult, and I could do it, so I did it. I'm doing it, you know?
I am a true empath. I am overly sensitive, and I try really, really hard not to rock the boat. All of these people perpetuating diet culture are victims of the cycle themselves, and that means they deserve to be treated with empathy and respect. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't be held accountable and corrected, because they absolutely should, especially because there's so many young people who are taking their advice. But my intention—
Do not affirm, Abby. When I hear that, I hear, so I need to affirm them. No.
is never to shame them on a personal level. And as I've grown and found my voice, I've really tried to express that in my content. Science and sass will always be my thing, but I never want my sassiness to mislabel me as a mean girl. And I think you'll continue to see that supportiveness in my content to come, especially over on my podcast Bite Back, where I have a lot more wiggle room to express nuance over just clickbait. And with that, folks, we have reached the end of the video. It felt like a little bit of a trip down memory lane for me to
Okay, so I guess let me know what you guys think. I feel like we covered a lot of stuff here. Overall, I'm not mad about this. I'm not like overjoyed, but I am pleasantly happy, I guess you could say, about the shift, especially from HAES. That's a huge thing. She's at least softened her stances on things that I don't agree with. And I think that's good. I understand her views on like tact and these types of things. I don't necessarily agree with it. Like I said, I'm very strong against not affirming the toxic ritualistic. No way. Not gonna happen here. But other than that, like I try to push the idea that there is no one solution. There's no one size fits all to this issue. And that's why it's complicated. And I try my best to talk about it from as big of a picture and as personally as I can. And like I said, a lot of you guys have expressed a desire for me to talk about institutional issues. So I'm going to, but it may not be what you want to hear, or it may be in a way you didn't expect, because I might have different views on these things. And I think a lot of times institutional things are an excuse and a tool of the toxic ritualistic. So we need to separate it and look at the actual problems at hand. But with that, you guys, I'm going to go. Thank you so much for watching. This is interesting. This is definitely newsworthy. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and go. Have a good one, you guys. Bye.